February 26, 1991. After a 6-week air campaign, the ground war against Iraq begins.
Good hit. Lads, grenade on the next one. Let's press round. Sorry. Come on, lads, get ready. Let's go.
F-16 Fighting Falcons were the workhorses of the Gulf War. More F-16s flew into combat than any other type of aircraft. In the early 1970s, the United States Air Force faced a unique dilemma. It was preparing to bring into service the best fighter of all time, the F-15 Eagle. But F-15s cost so much that they could only be deployed in small numbers. The West needed an inexpensive fighter to replace the F-4 Phantom, since the Soviet Union was filling the skies with low-cost, high-speed aircraft. The Soviets believed that even if the West had better planes, NATO could be overwhelmed by sheer force of numbers. So in 1972, the U.S. Air Force called for proposals for a lightweight aircraft that could serve as both a dogfighter and a ground attacker. The winner was a single-engine, single-pilot General Dynamics design, the F-16. GD took proven systems from other planes and married them to a highly aerodynamic fuselage. Price was kept to a relatively low $12 million per plane, thanks to a unique production agreement between GD and 4 NATO countries. F-16 parts would be mass-produced in America and Europe, and the monetary risk would be spread among the partners. In 1979, the F-16 went into service with the United States Air Force. By the 1990s, 17 other countries were flying it for air defense. The popularity of the F-16 is easy to explain. It's small, very fast, and highly maneuverable. Great characteristics for a dogfighter. In the hands of the right pilot, it can hold its own against anything flying today. And the F-16 has multi-mission capability. In other words, it can also drop bombs.
If you look up and try to see an F-16 from 13,000 feet coming down the chute in a 45-degree dive or so, and you look up at that airplane, you will not see it. You will not see it. At 8,000 feet, you might see it. And by the time you hear the sound, the bomb is going off in your face.
Aviators like the way the F-16 responds in the air, and they also like its unique cockpit. The airplane's seat is set back at a 30-degree angle. This helps pilots cope with the plane's 9G turn capability. The plane's bubble canopy gives pilots unobstructed vision. But the most striking feature of the F-16 is its fly-by-wire control system. The F-16 was the first fully electric fighter. All control commands are relayed by wires, not by cables or linkage controls. Pilot and machine become a seamless unit bonded by the plane's onboard computer. The F-16's APG-68 radar gives pilots a clear picture of air and ground threats. When the Falcon is in dogfighting mode, it can fire its 2 wingtip-mounted AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, as well as Sparrow and AMRAAM missiles. In August 1990, F-16 squadrons began shipping out to the Persian Gulf. Squadrons were drawn from the active Air Force, as well as the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserve. The 249 F-16s sent over flew out of at least 4 bases scattered across Saudi Arabia.
I've got a little bit over 10 years experience in the military now, flying lots of different types of airplanes. And when I went to the Persian Gulf, our wing did not take any, quote, inexperienced guys. We tended to take guys that had maybe more than 300 hours or so in the airplane, in F-16s, just so that it's stacking your team. If you have a group of pilots to draw from, you want to try to take the best team you can put together.
In the Gulf War, America's team included men and women. For Air Force personnel, female crew chiefs and tanker pilots were nothing new. But for some members of the coalition, particularly the Saudis, the sight of women working alongside men on the flight line was alarming. The Saudis were even more unnerved when they saw female officers giving orders to men.
They reported Gulf, but it's got to be Foxtrot. We're asking for the time.
Down for now.
Okay. Choctaw, relay.
But the sexual integration of the U.S. military was just one of the major changes that followed the Vietnam War.
There's no doubt about it. The Vietnam experience affected all of us deeply and provided us great insights. It started out at the national level, the President, Secretary of Defense, who were involved in detail in everything we did, and yet they would leave to the military those decisions that were the military's, picking of targets, for example. I think the fact that we fought the war unrelentingly is also an example. Where in Vietnam we'd use bombing halts and attempt to negotiate and do those kinds of things that would delay the conflict and prolong the suffering. I think all of us were death against that.
Turn right 8180, intercept the 160 radio.
Okay, F-16 on top.
Roger that. Tally ho.
Boom. Set target. 190.
My first day in combat, shoot, yeah, I was nervous. And I concentrated a lot more than I normally do. My head was on a swivel the whole time, looking around to see what was going on, make sure nobody was going to shoot me. But I remember coming back off the target once I got over the adrenaline rush, going, that wasn't so bad. I think I can do that again.
During January and February 1991, American F-16s bombed Iraqi military facilities, tanks, airfields, chemical factories, and supply lines. They also attacked Iraqi troops in and around occupied Kuwait. F-16s do not carry any laser-guided smart bombs into battle. The airplane isn't fitted with the laser targeting devices needed to drop such weapons. Because their primary targets were military positions in the desert, F-16s usually dropped cluster bomb units and 2,000-pound gravity bombs, weapons with no built-in guidance systems. Many were leftovers from the Vietnam War. F-16s dropped these bombs as part of the coalition's strategy of overwhelming force. The plan was to hit Iraq, particularly its ground troops, as hard as possible for as long as it took to break their will and force a surrender. When bombing, F-16 pilots activate the continuously computing impact point ordnance aiming system, a device that takes much of the inaccuracy out of dumb bomb delivery. A computer calculates airspeed, bomb weight, distance to target, and other factors, so when bombs are dropped, they have a high PK, or probability of kill. However, the higher a plane flies, the worse the PK.
Our bomb is designed around a very, very smart computer in the airplane to, once you pickle that bomb off, it's a hunk of iron falling to the ground. And although it's still a very accurate system, you're talking about, 50 feet is a very average bomb from 10 to 15,000 feet. But 50 feet sometimes is the difference between a miss and a hit. So our PK was certainly not as good as the very, very smart bombers.
General Horner and I were obsessed, and that's probably the right word, with having the minimum loss of life. And so there were restrictions that were placed on all of the airplanes as far as minimum altitudes they could fly during the day. And the F-16 was one of the airplanes that had to put up with our restrictions. And so We did not expect them to be as accurate. It's just a plain physics. But if you honestly do not believe that the outcome of a war is in question, and the only question is how many lives you're going to lose, then that's a prudent action.
F-16s and many other coalition planes were restricted to medium altitudes because of Iraq's Vietnam-style tactic of spraying the sky with bullets and surface-to-air missiles.
If you talked about it statistically, I'm sure if you compared the numbers of SAMs that were situated in the Baghdad, Kuwait city area, it'd probably be very comparable to what the Vietnamese, what the pilots who flew in North Vietnam faced in the Hanoi area. It's really, really heavy concentration. We just were a lot better equipped to deal with them in this day and age due to the technology that we had.
By the end of the Gulf War, 2 F-16s had been lost to surface-to-air missiles, and 2 others were down by anti-aircraft guns. F-16 performance was also diminished by poor weather, and later by the oil well fires that fouled the skies. The F-16 is at its best on clear, sunny days.
120 at 10.
Stand by, unable to give you radar advisory.
There's a 10,000-foot layer, kind of a scud layer, where the sand would come up off the desert. The sand there is more like a talcum powder than the sand we know in our sandboxes. So, any kind of wind picked up, it'd come up in the atmosphere. So there's always about 10,000 feet, some type of restriction there and below. You could see down, you couldn't see out a good bit, except after a front came through.
But not all the F-16s were blind. 72 flew with lantern navigation pods containing terrain-following radar and a forward-looking infrared sensor. Perhaps the major test of the F-16's power and versatility came on February 24th, 1991, when after 6 weeks of air assault, the ground war began.
During the last part of the war, just before and when the Army came in, the sense of urgency of the target sets became more real because now they're going to be risking their lives. Before, it was just us in the airplanes and we fought our own little war. But when you added the Army in, now we knew somebody else was involved that we had to help, which now the urgency of whether getting to your target, taking out exactly the target that they want you to take out, became a real player.
I'm ready. Okay? Yeah.
Good shot. I think you smoked it. Gotta take these guys out first, though. Okay.
To support the ground troops, F-16s began flying forward air control missions in enemy areas designated as kill boxes. Kill boxes originated when coalition air planners took a Saudi Air Force map of the Gulf region based on a grid of 60-mile squares, then subdivided those squares into 15-mile boxes. Strike planes were then sent to each box to find and destroy targets. When the ground war started, F-16s were sent on killer scout missions to kill boxes close to frontline troops.
And the killer scout mission, where they would actually spot targets and identify them and things, were very helpful in systematically treating that ground army. Because if you take 2 or 4 fighter pilots and say, okay, this 15-mile square, you keep coming back every day until basically there's no ground threat there. It's after a couple days, they are very familiar with every little sand dune in that 15-mile square.
F-16s flying killer scout missions were frequent visitors to airborne tankers. Loitering over kill boxes for long periods of time consumes a great deal of fuel.
Doug.
The ultimate purpose of kill box attacks was to overwhelm Iraqi forces with a shower of munitions falling from the sky like rain. It was hoped that a frightening display of air power would break the will of the Iraqi army. Throughout the Gulf War, F-16s attacked soldiers of the Iraqi Army and the elite Republican Guard. Studies have shown that when a military unit, no matter how capable or motivated, drops beneath the 50% combat strength level, it becomes all but useless. The coalition hoped that constant air attacks would cause so many desertions, surrenders, wounds, and deaths in the Iraqi ranks that its entire frontline force would fall below the 50% mark. Their goal, however, was not to kill every Iraqi soldier on the battlefield.
We could kill a lot of people if we wanted to using, for example, cluster bomb units over large areas. When in fact we went with, for example, laser-guided bombs against tanks. And the enemy knew this, and immediately, as soon as they parked their tank, they'd get away, and you'd see the slit trenches appear around the tanks. So every target we looked at in terms of how to limit the loss of life and how to destroy those systems that would cause loss of life on the friendly side.
Right there next to him. No, take out your He's gone. Good shot.
Tanks were key targets for F-16s, Apache gunships, and A-10s. Iraq had the fourth largest army in the world, and tank warfare was one of that army's strengths. F-16s often dropped cluster bomb units such as these on or near Iraqi armor. They were somewhat effective, though nowhere near as lethal to Iraq's top-of-the-line tanks as Maverick missiles. When the ground war began and tank killing became priority one, Maverick was the F-16 pilot's weapon of choice. Since it only took one missile to destroy an Iraqi tank, a $70,000 Maverick equaled a $1.5 million T-72 tank. But air-to-ground attacks are not always as straightforward as bombing a lone tank in the desert. February 26th. Joint Star's surveillance aircraft spot a massive convoy of Iraqi troops retreating from Kuwait City along the highway to Basra. F-15Es, F-111s, A-10s, and F-16s are sent in to shell the hundreds of tanks, trucks, and cars escaping Kuwait. The extent of the destruction caused by hours of steady air-to-ground attacks is frightening. Weeks of watching laser-guided bomb strikes on bridges and bunkers had conditioned the public to view the Gulf War as an elaborate computer game in which faraway targets were obliterated with almost magical precision. The attack on the road to Basra brought the reality of war and the deadly potential of airplanes back into perspective. There was nothing clean about this attack, and the fact that coalition airplanes had launched a full-force assault on a retreating army raised troubling moral questions back in the United States. Should the coalition have allowed the Iraqi army to retreat unmolested? Was air power misused?
I was amazed at a question one newsman asked about when we attacked the retreating forces. They said, wasn't that extreme violence? I believe that was the term used. I think that misses the point. War is extreme violence. And the way to halt the suffering is to get the war over as quickly and decisively as you possibly can. If you're going to enter into this adventure where you take human life and lose human life, you have a moral obligation to get it over as quickly as possible. And that is why the way we fought this war with such great intensity and unyielding pressure on the enemy until it was finally over with and we'd accomplished our goals.
The overall performance of the F-16 in the Persian Gulf is a bad question to ask me, because I'm going to tell you it was great, because I thought it was. It was a marvelous airplane, very capable. I felt very comfortable and very safe flying it. Mechanically, it holds up. I mean, if you look at the sortie generation and the Persian Gulf War and compare it to sortie generation in the Vietnam War, we've come a long way. because you can take the F-16 and fly that airplane 3 times in 4 hours, and because we did it. But the dedication of the pilots, none of us, I never went down the chute going, I'm just going to pickle these things off so I can get out of here. I went down every time going, you know, I owe Uncle Sam this 5 seconds right down the chute. I owe it to him. That's my job. That's what he pays me to do. So I will do the best that I possibly can for him.
Come on, Tunic, stop! How'd it go, buddy? No. Tunic, buddy! Good job. Good job, buddy. Good job, man. Way to go. All right. Yeah. It was ugly, huh?
This is the A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. In an age of stealth fighters and smart bombs, the A-10 is a primitive airplane. It is neither fast, nor elegant, nor state-of-the-art.
Okay, I'm in from the southwest, ops check 3.8. I'm setting up the bombs. Copy, you're gonna get 1 pass at it. Copy that.
A-10s were the most vulnerable combat planes in the Gulf, but they were deadly efficient at their mission, destroying enemy tanks.
Very, very nice shot.
Although it looks like an old design, the A-10 is one of the youngest planes in the Air Force inventory. It was developed by Fairchild Industries in the 1970s to defend the NATO nations against a Soviet ground attack. The A-10 is built around a gun, the 21-foot GAU-8 Avenger cannon, which spits out 4,200 shells per minute. A-10s can linger over target areas for hours, swooping in low to attack with cannon blazing. Flying low exposes the Warthog to ground fire, but the plane is protected by its rugged titanium shell and redundant systems. All the aircraft's major systems have backups. The plane was built to take severe punishment and get its pilots home. A-10s have been in service since 1977, but they have never been favorites of the Air Force leadership, who generally prefer high-tech, high-flying aircraft such as the F-16. The A-10 is anything but high-tech. In fact, the plane looks and flies more like a World War II-era fighter. Warthogs are flown by stick and rudder controls, not by onboard computers. Though they carry some advanced systems, A-10 cockpits are still dominated by old-fashioned dials and gauges. This lack of sophistication can be an advantage. A-10s are far less expensive than F-16s, and they take punishment their supersonic cousins would have difficulty surviving. But as the 1980s ended, the A-10 seemed destined for the scrap heap. The collapse of the Eastern Bloc made the possibility of fighting a ground war in Europe remote. A-10s were scattered among a few Air Force units, the Air Force Reserve and the Air National Guard.
Flying the A-10 for over 10 years now, we had practiced with the Eastern Europe scenario, flying against Eastern Bloc countries. Low altitude type of scenarios, working close with the Army, doing the type of things, air-to-ground, close air support. However, in the Persian Gulf, it was all totally different. In a low, medium-intensity conflict, we jacked up our altitude to stay away from the AAA. We were mostly worried about the ground threat.
The Gulf War thrust the Warthog into frontline combat. But it was rumored that the Air Force hadn't wanted to send the A-10s over at all because they feared the slow-flying planes would be easy prey for Iraqi anti-aircraft guns.
I heard stories about how we held the A-10 from deploying. That's absolutely untrue. They came at their appointed time and went to their appointed place and served superbly. We used the A-10 and the F-16s, AV-8s, and F-18s to provide sort of a fundamental attack system against the Kuwaiti theater of operations. In addition, the A-10s were invaluable in doing things like search and rescue and scud hunts out in the western area during daylight hours.
On January 17, 1991, A-10s were among the 668 coalition aircraft that took to the air for the first massive assault of the Gulf War. Missions were long, and pilots were taxed to their mental and physical limits.
I flew 3 missions on the first day, a total of about 8 hours of flying time and about 12 hours in the cockpit. When you came back from a mission, you didn't even get out. You hot pit refueled as you sat there with engines running, going over with the intel people on what you did, where you went, and how it all worked out. They gave you current intel, and then you moved over to another slot where they put the bombs and guns on board. Basically, as 12 hours in the cockpit doesn't really, we trained for it, but you're really not, it's never comfortable in a single-seat cockpit with an injection seat. However, we've done it before, and you can do it over and over. It's by the end of the day, they actually have to help you out of the cockpit.
A-10s were in constant danger of attack from Iraqi surface-to-air missiles. To stop the SAMs, F-4G Wild Weasels were sent in with radar-seeking missiles. With their radar neutralized, Iraqi soldiers fired blindly at aircraft noise. But the A-10 is relatively quiet. So quiet, the Iraqis called it the silent gun.
9 times out of 10, as you're rolling in on a target, you're concentrating so much on the bombing run that you really can't think about the AAA. If you do, you're going to have a lousy pass. You're usually hearing it from your wingman saying they're shooting you up pretty good. AAA, you better start moving. You pull off into the cloud. Hopefully that they're only going with a visual type of shot at you. But yeah, we've seen it all. And they said that you only see probably about 30 to 40% of the AAA fired at you. So that's just with the tracers and the rounds that are blowing up around you. The rest of the stuff you never see.
Just got a good Maverick lock. Okay, are you sure there's something in there? Okay, firm. Okay, fire. I'm off left. Go ahead.
He's not moving. He's gonna live. What are you? You look dead. What are you? You look like something. Okay.
You don't think that there's 3 guys in that tank that you just put a Maverick. You think, well, you know, that was just a tank. And I think you depersonalize it yourself. If you didn't, it's sort of like knowing that people are out there shooting at you. If you think about it too intense and sit there at night between the Scud attacks, and then yeah, it's going to drive you crazy. A lot of guys go to church a lot all of a sudden, and they see things different ways. You do a lot of sitting, watching the sunsets as you're coming back over the border. You have another hour of flight just to get back to the home base. So you watch the sunset and you think about things, and it's your time to move off to the side and forget about what you're doing for a little while. And yeah, it takes a lot of, I guess, discipline to think about what you're doing, the reasons you're doing it. And I'm sure everybody had to go through that in their mind. And you know, everybody came out with it fairly well.
The A-10 was the least sophisticated strike airplane in the Gulf, but it was also one of the deadliest. The 144 A-10s sent to Southwest Asia flew almost 8,100 missions. They destroyed more than 1,000 enemy tanks and thousands of other vehicles and artillery pieces. A-10s can carry up to 16,000 pounds of ordnance on 11 external stations, including cluster bombs and Maverick missiles for ground attack, and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles for air-to-air combat. But more often than not, pilots used their Avenger cannons against tanks, and in a first, against an Iraqi helicopter.
I rolled in on a helicopter, from about 12,000 feet. Nobody had fired an air-to-air missile off an A-10. It was the first time, of course, we're carrying them in war, the AIM-9s. So I tried to lock on with the AIM-9s, and they just wouldn't do it because of the hot background and the helicopter looking down from that altitude. I tried 2 lock-ons, and fortunately I remembered to arm up the gun. Once I couldn't get a lock, I decided to put a few bullets through him, so maybe 75 bullets. I told my wingman if he had a shot to take a shot. He tried, but his slant range was too far off, so he missed, and then I just pirouetted over and put about 300 rounds into it. and there wasn't much left after that.
Maverick was the A-10's other primary tank-killing weapon. These 500-pound guided missiles reach supersonic speed when they hit their targets, and not even the best armor can survive a direct hit. There are two types of Mavericks. Television-guided missiles are used in daylight. The missile sees contrasts between objects and backgrounds. Maverick is a fire-and-forget weapon, so when a pilot fires his missile, the video image cuts off. Infrared Mavericks, which were used in great numbers in the Gulf, detect targets based on differences in temperature. Since metal cools at a slower speed than sand, it was easy for pilots to spot tanks in the desert.
Okay, I've got what appears to be a building and some distinct hot spots around it.
Roger, that's your target. He confers.
Okay, he said north,
Target
man.
area should be.
I got a mover.
Mavericks were sometimes used by A-10s equipped with pavepenny pods. Pavepenny detects the laser beams used to mark targets by laser designation planes. A-10 pilots have earned their reputation as down-and-dirty fighters by making the most of the limited materials on hand. For instance, the pilots of the 355th Tactical Fighter Squadron, the only dedicated night-flying A-10 unit in the Gulf, sighted targets by using the video system from their infrared Mavericks as a sort of poor man's forward-looking infrared scanner. The night fighters also employed the primitive but effective tactic of dropping flares such as these over their targets. A-10 pilots sometimes wore night vision goggles and sighted targets through regular binoculars. Ground troops or other pilots called in airstrikes. Then A-10s flew in, dropped their blinding flares, then strafed and bombed targets at will. The Iraqis did their best to hide their armor, to little avail. Here, a night-flying A-10 has spotted an Iraqi tank hidden under netting designed to hide its infrared hotspot. The shape of the tank is obscured, but the tank tracks around the netting are easy to see. By the end of the war, Iraq had lost over 90% of its tanks, 90% of its artillery, and 50% of its other armored vehicles in the Kuwait theater of operations. The Iraqi soldiers who survived the non-stop air assault were those who learned to put as much distance between themselves and their weapons as possible.
Okay, we got people running.
Gosh, personally, I don't know. I stopped counting. I stopped counting the number of missiles I fired. I stopped counting the bombs I dropped. It's just, as I said, I guess someday in my mind it'll come to me, but I sort of push that off to the corner of my mind. It's you just go from day to day, and you write your letters home, and then you go to sleep and you get up for your next mission. But if I can't even begin to tell you how many tanks. I just didn't keep count.
The problem we faced with the A-10 was the fact that because of its slower airspeeds, it was more susceptible to enemy ground fire. With about 10% of our forces, we suffered over half our casualties on the Air Force, United States Air Force side, through the A-10. I think the Marine Corps had a similar problem with the AV-8 because the way the engines are located along the center line of the aircraft, and the heat-seeking missiles would strike the middle of the airplane rather than the tail. So you have to look at each aircraft's design and weigh its strengths and weaknesses to know where to use it in the battle. The A-10s were superb, however, they were more vulnerable to the enemy defenses.
That vulnerability was offset by the A-10's amazing resilience. Pilots flying into anti-aircraft fire were particularly thankful for the titanium bathtub, the super-hard cockpit shell that shields them from flak.
Boy, that Hummer was trying hard to blow you out of the air. Look at that. Tell me the hog can't take some hits, huh?
I'm telling you. I isolated both hydraulic systems. As soon as I was hit, the right system went to zero and all the lights in the world came on. Missile went off and I thought it was a SAM going by, so I started kicking flares after that. And good show. wish I'd have kept it on the runway for you, but the tire blew and I just couldn't keep it on.
You know, when you see a missile come at you, and you're in a four-ship, you wonder who it's locked onto, and yeah, I guess you see a lot going on, and you react, and AAA going off near you, it's scary, and then it's tough sometimes. Sometimes they'll have to take you off of the schedule and say, well, why don't you go do this on the ground for a while, give you a day off, just prop your feet up and relax. But there's not much they can do. We're glad it was a short war. You know, it was, I don't know how else to keep you from getting burned out other than give you the day off or two. We did have guys that, you know, just said, well, you hold your hand up just like in the old football games, I need out, coach, and pretty much we let it go with that.
During the Gulf War, A-10s attacked a wide range of targets, including tanks, artillery, and bunkers.
Okay, passing 10, I got something revetted. Looks like a target, I'm gonna hose it.
A-10s work near, but generally not directly alongside advancing Army units. Low-level search and destroy missions were handled primarily by the Army's fearsome Apache gunships. The massive assault kept Iraqi ground forces from maneuvering. If they tried, they were pounded by tanks, artillery, and air power.
Roger, we got a whole bunch of guys throwing AK-47s up here and down here. Does that mean anything? Don't shoot them, shoot their equipment. Okay, roger that. They're just, we're gonna back away from them a little bit. Our gun is out of ammo at this time. Okay. They seem to be no threat at all. Okay, it's 065, 1,800 meters. They just want them to drag away a bunch. This is,
The air attacks cut enemy soldiers off from food and water. Constant bombing left thousands in shock. Soon, the coalition army found itself overwhelmed by surrendering troops. By the end of the war, more than 86,000 Iraqis were in custody.
When I talked to you all before, and you asked me what we were going to do if we had to go to war, and I told you we were going to kick ass, and that's exactly what we did.
General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of coalition forces, expected the ground phase of the war would last 3 weeks. In fact, it took just 100 hours to recapture Kuwait and neutralize the Iraqi army. But ground forces moved so quickly and the speed of combat was so fast that coalition attackers mistook some of their own invading army for retreating Iraqi soldiers. At least 11 Americans were killed and 15 wounded from air-to-ground friendly fire.
We had some friendly fire issues, and they are disturbing. There's no doubt about it. We had an A-10 hit a Marine vehicle. I believe we had a Marines rolled in on a Marine column. We had an A-10 hit 2 British vehicles, or 2 A-10s. And we had a number of incidents ground to ground. Now, taken in total, this number is relatively very, very small. It's minute. But the problem is, nowadays, with the lethality of modern airplanes, if you have one incident, it results in 7 or 8 fatalities, where in past wars, such an incident might reflect a damaged vehicle or a wounded person. So we have to work this issue very, very hard.
Roger, the reason I'm asking is need to find out if this is a friendly or not.
Yeah. They put in a lot of restrictions to try to protect against the friendly fire episodes. They put a lot of restrictions on anything that was going to do air-to-ground in close proximity to the troops. We had trained years of working with the Army, but the Army basically with their attack helicopters took care of most of the threats in their general vicinity. We worked further north, anywhere from 3 to 5 miles. We were able to watch the tanks roll across the border and watch them attack different Iraqi positions, but normally they'd want us away from their actual sphere of influence. It was like a blitzkrieg all over again with our tanks rolling through at 40, 50 miles an hour, shooting on the run.
Over the course of 43 days, more than 2,600 aircraft flew 110,000 sorties that crushed Iraq's defenses and left its troops battle-weary and anxious to surrender. Laser-guided weapons let us drop fewer bombs for greater effect than in past wars. But it should not be forgotten that the ultimate result of a massive military offensive is massive loss of life. The chief difference between this war and others is that the balance of casualties was wildly uneven. Coalition forces lost roughly 200 soldiers in combat. The Iraqi army lost at least 100,000. Here, Americans bury an Iraqi soldier killed during Operation Desert Storm.
One of the things from Desert Storm that bothers me deeply, they call it the Nintendo War. The idea that it's nothing against my computer against your bunker, or my bomb against your truck. It loses sight of the fact that there's great suffering and death involved in war. And we must never use war as a solution to anything other than as a last resort. So if we learn anything from Desert Storm, I hope that is that we don't want war, that war doesn't work, and that a would-be aggressor in the world will think twice before he engages in war. I hope that on our side, that our people don't think that war is some sort of a bloodless, mechanical thing. It is a terrible, terrible thing, and we must be very, very careful of how we enter into war and what we expect to get out of it.
Was the Gulf War a successful campaign to liberate a powerless nation from the clutches of a fascist invader? Or was it a violent dispute over control of the world's oil supply? Was the war a watershed event that saw the United Nations act as one to tame a powerful rogue state? Were diplomatic sanctions given enough time to work? These questions are still being debated, and perhaps years will pass before the Gulf War's historical significance is decided. But it is certain that the conflict was a turning point in the history of warfare. For the first time, a massive round-the-clock strategic air campaign was directly responsible for a decisive victory over a well-defended enemy. After 80 years, air power fulfilled its deadly potential.
Hey, Benny, give me a quick rep on that tank.
You can tell we've got such a high tech to figure out how much gas we got. We go beat on it with our knuckles.
Fuel flow at 140 gallons. He'll figure it out, Eric.
Where is he? Or you say figured it out?
I hope he will. He's intermittent fuel flow at 140 gallons.
So we can tell when he's coming in and how much transferring gas is.
I think in any recent war, if you ask any fighter pilot who his hero is, he'd probably say the air-to-air tanker guys. I myself can remember in Vietnam being over Hanoi Island, almost out of gas, and here comes a 135 way up north of where he ought to be because of the enemy threat, and turning around, falling in behind, and getting enough fuel to get home.
Tonight is an example, going as far as we did when I finally pressed across the border into Saudi Arabia. I was to the point where I was very low on fuel. We were on either side of the tanker's wing and proceeded across the border, and we traveled about 50 or 60 miles when another unit apparently was rolling in on the outskirts of Baghdad. And Baghdad, which hasn't been doing a whole lot against us because they can't see us, was apparently responding to all these conventional airplanes that they saw, and they were putting on another fantastic light show, which even from 80 or 90 miles away it was painfully apparent to our tanker crew. And you could see the wings do this a little bit as they pondered whether that was the direction they were going or we were going, but to their credit, they continued on. They are people who are dedicated to getting us the gas and getting us where we need to.
That takes a lot of guts to be sitting in there in an airplane loaded with gas and going into harm's way.
The Strategic Air Command deployed 256 KC-135 tankers and 46 KC-10 tankers during the Gulf War. Tankers are flying gas stations. Air refueling gives gas-guzzling fighters and bombers the ability to stay in the air. This was crucial in the Gulf War, where some strike aircraft had to fly 1,000 miles to their targets, then 1,000 miles home again. Every aircraft from every surface, as well as many coalition planes, used U.S. Air Force tankers.
one position there, and I forget the name of it, where it was a common tanker position. Pretty much day or night, you can go to this O'Malley. You can go to this spot and find airborne fuel. Go there, top off, bring it back to the ship, and basically have a lot of gas airborne for returning strikers.
The KC-10 extender first flew in 1980. The Air Force has 59 in its inventory. The KC-10 was based on the commercial DC-10, and it combines the task of tanker and cargo carrier in one body. It can service all U.S. military aircraft and many NATO planes. The KC-135 Stratotanker looks like a Boeing 707, but it was designed to carry heavy fuel loads. It first flew in 1956. 633 are now in service. The Stratotanker is closely identified with another, even longer-serving SAC airplane, the B-52 Stratofortress. Like the B-52, the KC-135 has been updated and redesigned over the years. The Air Force expects it will continue flying well into the next century.
And we're latched. He's got a tear coming in on the right. That good shot there. There's an empty hose up on the lead now. Watch your altitude here early. You're going down a little bit.
One common problem most military pilots have faced is the phenomenon of vertigo. Vertigo often hits you when you're trying to hook up to a tanker during a rainstorm in pitch-black weather. Your body tells you that your plane is crooked and you're going to crash. Your instruments say you're fine. It takes a great deal of discipline to trust the machine, not your senses.
Is this your pre or post? This is, a post and a pre.
Refueling gets to be second nature. Every guy that flew fighters over there probably did 200 plus hookups during the war. We met tankers about 70 miles from our departure point, and we refueled with the tankers all the way down through the Gulf and into our destination over in the Emirates. But shoot, 10, maybe 8 refuelings, quite a few.
Especially when you load up the A6 with 10,000 pounds of ordnance, 10 1,000-pound bombs. There's a lot of drag out there, and you can suck down an enormous amount of gas. And it was always a little comforting to know that there was a tanker up there and you could hit it once you came out of bad guy country.
Because you got an awful lot of airplanes floating around the area. Offset ready. How do they know which one goes first?
You know, the unsung heroes in this war are the tankers, because they fill the skies of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and I might add Iraq. Yes, there were tankers over Iraq refueling fighters and bombers.
During Operation Desert Storm, tankers flew approximately 15,500 sorties, refueled 46,000 aircraft, and offloaded 110 million gallons of fuel.
I'm all right here on it, yeah.
You see, it's really, if it goes right, it's a well-orchestrated thing of beauty, because as receivers get their gas, they're pulling out and breaking away to the left, and they're not 50 feet away from the tanker, and the next ones are coming in. Number 2 tank and the lead tank now.